Hey, how's everyone doing? Welcome back. This is the third episode in the scientific calculator series. By the end of this video, we should be able to evaluate expressions that the user types in. This should be pretty simple, so let's get started. Alright, so the first thing that I want to do is change the ID of our text view and our edit text view. So if you remember, the text view is going to be what's displaying the previous equation that the user typed in. So to change this ID, you can change it within the XML, but I think a better way to do it is by coming over to the far right, clicking the design button, and then changing the ID in our attributes panel. And then I'm going to give it an ID of previous calculation view. And then hit enter, and then click refactor. So if we come back over to our split view so we can see the XML, I'm going to come down to our edit text. This is the view that the user will be typing their expressions in. I'm going to click on this tag, again, come over to the far right, click design, and then within this ID slot within our attributes panel, I'm going to change it from this ID to display edit text. Hit enter and then make sure you refactor that, and then we should be all set up to start writing some of our code. And I should mention you can change the IDs of our buttons, but for this video, I'm just going to leave everything as button 7, so like our clear button has an ID of button 7. Doesn't really make sense, but it'll work. But anyways, I'm going to come over to the mainActivity.java file, and then we can start setting up a few of the variables that we're going to need. So the first variable we're going to need to set up are two variables that's going to store our edit text, the thing that the user is actually going to be typing in, and our text view, this guy that's showing our previous equations. So we're going to grab those instances and store them within a variable. So I'm going to come outside of our onCreate method, and I'm going to type in private text view, and then I'm going to call it previous calculation. And then I'm going to come just below it, type in private again, and then type in edit text. And then we're just going to call this edit text the display. And now what we have to do is actually assign values to our two variables that we just set up. Now, where are we going to be doing this? We're going to be doing it in our onCreate method. This method right here, the onCreate, runs once when our activity is first loaded. So generally, you're going to put all the initiation steps for your activity in this method here. So in our case, we're going to be assigning values for our text view and the edit text. So how do we assign these values? Well, it's pretty simple. All we have to do is type in previous calculation, set that equal to a find view by ID, and then we're going to type in r.id. Whatever ID you happen to give your text view, the thing that's displaying our previous equation. So in my case, we call it previous calculation view. So let's going to grab this instance of our text view and store it within our variable here in our Java code. And we're going to do the same exact thing for our display. So type in display, set that equal to a find view by ID, r.id.display edit text, and that should grab that edit text as well. Now that we have both the text view and edit text pulled into our Java code, what we need to do now is figure out some way that the user can change the string values within our display. Now, the best way to probably do this would be setting up on-click listeners for each of our buttons and then running some method that's capable of changing the string that's in our display. So to start off, I just want to make this as simple as possible. So let's work with one button, the 0 button. So we're going to create an on-click listener for our 0 button and then create a method that can update our display with a bunch of zeros when the user presses that button. So let's create the on-click listener for this first by typing in public void, and then we're going to call it 0 button push. And then we're going to pass in a view, and I'm just going to call it view. And then within this on-click listener, we need to run some method that can update our display. Let's just call it update text. And then this method should be able to take in a string value that's going to be used to update our display. So if we passed in a 0 here, a 0 should be added into our display. Now let's actually create this method by typing in private void, we'll call it update text. And then we're going to take in a string, and let's call it string to add. And then within here, we're going to do something really simple just to test this out. We're going to end up getting rid of this eventually. Let's just type in display.setText to whatever string to add was passed in here. So for now, we're going to leave our update text like this, and then what we have to do is assign this on-click listener to our 0 button. So let's come back over to our XML file. Let's find our 0 button, come over to the far right, click design. Make sure you actually have your 0 button selected. Come over to your attributes panel and then scroll down just a little bit until you find this on-click slot here. It should be within your common attributes. And then click the drop down and then click 0 button push. And if it doesn't show up for you, make sure that you have this method set as public and not private. If it's set as private, it won't show up in that drop down. So click the drop down, click the 0 button push, And let's come up to the top, click the play button to run our app, and then we'll see if a 0 gets added into our display. So if we come over, we could click a bunch of these buttons here, nothing happens, but if we click the 0 button, you could see a 0 was added. If we keep clicking it, nothing else is going to happen. We need to change our update text method just a little bit before that actually works. But for now, we know that we can actually add in strings to our display. So let's go ahead and create the rest of the on-click listeners for all of our buttons. So if we come back over to our main activity.java, I'm going to copy this code here, paste it just below it, and I'm going to keep this same naming scheme. So I'm going to call the next button 1 button push, and then I'll come down here, we'll make the 2 button be 2 button push, and so on. So once I get all these set up, I'll be back. All right, so I got all the on-click listeners written, but I need to explain a few things. Now, if you take a look, I changed this part of the update text right here. What is this doing? All it's doing is grabbing the 0 string that we wrote in our strings.xml file. So before I went ahead and created the rest of the on-click listeners, we had something like this. We hard-coded in a string, but if you remember, we already went ahead and created a bunch of strings. We have a 0 string right here. So instead of having a duplicate, essentially, all we're doing is referencing this string within our Java code. So then if we ever decide to change one of these strings here, it will be applied to our button on our XML file, along with the string that's being added into our display. So instead of hard coding in a 0 value here, what I want you guys to do is type in getResources.getString r.string and then the name of whatever string you need. So I went ahead and did that for all of our buttons except for 3 of them. I didn't do that for our clear button because if you think about it, we want all of the text in our display to be cleared, so I just passed in an empty string here. And then for our equals button and backspace button, I just left those as empty because they're not going to use the update text method. So all we have to do now is actually apply each of these on-click listeners to their corresponding button. So I'll show you guys how to do this one more time. So let's apply the on-click listener for the clear button. So if you come over to your XML, click the design tab in the far right, all you have to do is click on the clear button, come over to the attributes panel, come down to your common attributes, and you're looking for the on-click listener slot, click the drop down, and then you're just looking for this clear button push method, and then this method right here. So let's come back over, scroll down. This method right here will now be executed whenever the user presses the clear button. So I'm just going to go through, apply all of the on-click listeners for the rest of our buttons, and then I'll be back. All right, so now I have all the on-click listeners assigned to their corresponding button. I should mention I did forget to create the decimal on-click listener, so I went ahead in the main activity.java file, I did add in this extra method here. It's the same as all the other methods, except, I'm grabbing the decimal text from our string resource file, and then I assigned it to this button. So now that we have all the on-click listeners set up, let's run our app and see if we get each of the correct characters added into our display. So if we click the 0 button, we get a 0, we get the decimal, and then if we click the equals button, nothing should happen because it's an empty method. We click the plus, we get a plus sign, 3, 2, 1, 4, 5, 6. Everything looks like it's working just fine. The clear should be an empty string, so we get enter a value, which is perfect. All we need to do now is mess around with our update text method. So let's close this app down and come over to the main activity.java file, and let's start working on this update text method. So once you come over to your main activity.java file, find your update text method, and what I want to do is slowly add more and more functionality to our update text method until it gets to where we need it to be. So the first issue I think we should tackle is when the user places in, for example, an 8, and then if they clicked a 1 right after, that 8 character shouldn't be replaced with the 1. The 1 should be placed right beside it, making an 81, right? So let's add in that functionality first. So we need to get rid of this bit here. And then what I'd like to do is create a string variable. So we'll type in string, call it old string, and then just set that equal to the display.getText, and then convert that text to a string. So we're going to store whatever string is currently in our display, and then what we're going to do is type in display.setText to a string.format, and then we're going to format this string, so mod s, and then comma old string, followed by the string to add. All right, so what I want to do is walk you guys through what is happening in the update text method when it's called. So the very first thing we do is grab whatever string is in our display and store it into our string variable called old string. And then what we do is tack on the string to add to our old string using the string.format method. And then we're going to take whatever string comes out of here and apply that or set the text of our display to our newly created string. So if we go back to our 81 example, an 8 would be stored in the old string variable, and then what we're going to do is tack on a 1 to the 8 to create an 81. That all happens within the string.format method here, and then we're going to set that newly created string to our display. So let's go ahead, run our app and see if this logic works by clicking the play button in the far right. So once our app loads up, let's start clicking some buttons to see if this works. So let's go with our 81 example. So we have an 8, and then if we click a 1 is placed just after the 8, and we can keep placing in values here. And it looks like everything is working, but there is one issue. If you take a look, our cursor isn't being shifted with each additional character that's being added to our display. So what we need to do is modify our update text method to placing characters based on the position of this cursor. Because if you think about it, if the user wants to make an edit with this number here, we should be able to place in a number in between the 4 and 7, but we never can. So let's go ahead and fix that really quick. So if we come back over to the main activity.java file, again, find your update text method. And within here, we're going to create a few more string variables. What I want to do is create a left and right string variable. So we can do that by typing in string. We'll call it left string. And then let's create another string variable. We'll call it right string. And just before we assign a value to both of these new string variables, what we need to do is actually grab the position of our cursor. So we can do that by typing in int, we'll call it cursor position. And then to grab the cursor position, all we have to do is type in display.getSelectedStart, and then this will grab the current position of our cursor. And what we need to do with our left and right strings is create a substring of whatever string we pull out of our display. So that'll probably make a little bit more sense once we write in the code for this. But what we need to do is type in oldString.substring, and the start index for this substring is going to be from 0, and we're going to go all the way up until our cursor position. So this is going to grab all the characters from the far left up until the point of our cursor. And then what we need to do is grab the rest of our string, so the right-hand side of it. So we type in equals, type in oldString.substring, and we're going to go from our cursor position all the way to the end, but we don't need to place in an end index. It just knows to grab the rest of the string. So all you have to do is pass in the cursor position here. So just in case you're a little confused about what's happening here, let's say we had the string JSON, right? We have our cursor right here. I'm moving it left and right. Let's say our cursor was right here in between the A and S. What the left string is going to do is grab this part of the JSON string. So it's going to store JA, and the right hand side is going to store SON. And then what we're going to do is place in the string to add right in between our left and right strings. So to sandwich those strings together, what we need to do is come in and change our format method just a little bit. So we're going to take in one more string. So type in mod s here. It's going to take in the left string, the string to add, and then followed by our right string. And it's just going to sandwich all those strings together to create one huge string, and we're going to set that to our display. And then don't forget, what we need to do is shift over our cursor position every time we add in a new string. So to move our cursor position, we need to type in display.setSelection, and then we're going to go from the current cursor position plus whatever our string to add dot length is. Now, if you're a little curious as to why we're doing string to add dot length and not just doing a +1, it's because eventually, once we rotate our device, we're going to add in things like cosine, tangent, like our prime number function. Those strings that we'll be adding in aren't always going to be equal to a length of 1. So we need to shift our cursor position over to whatever length our string to add is. So if that doesn't make sense, leave a comment down below. I can explain it a little bit differently for you, but this should be everything we need for our update text method. All right, so now that we have everything in our update text method, let's go ahead and run this app to make sure that everything's working properly. We should be able to place in new characters wherever the cursor position happens to be. So if I type in like 89, I could come in between the 8 and the 9, and that's actually let's get rid of that first. Okay, so let's close this down, and we're going to add in one thing so that keyboard doesn't pop up. So in the onCreate method, let's come just below where we set up our previous calculation and display variables. And to prevent the default keyboard from popping up when the user clicks on the edit text, what we need to do is type in display.setShowSoftInputOnFocus. And then all we have to do is pass in false because we don't want the keyboard to show up. So let's go ahead, rerun our app. And now if we click on this, we don't have the default keyboard popping up and we can only use the buttons that we put in. So now let's see if we could place in a value in between our 8 and a 5. So if I did like 98 times 56, we could see that works. We could put in like a minus sign here. So it looks like our update text method is working and we can place in new characters wherever the cursor position happens to be. So now that we have the update text method created, it's all finished up. What I'd like to do now is fix our clear button, because one thing that I did notice is it doesn't work. And then we also need to add some code to the backspace on-click listener so we can actually delete characters based on the cursor position. So let's go ahead, write some code for that. The first thing that I'd like to fix is the clear button. I think it'll be the easiest. We don't want to use our update text function. What we want to do is just directly set the text of our edit text by typing in display.setText, and we're just going to set it to an empty string. So we don't even have to use the update text method. We can just do this and that'll clear the whole display for us. Now what I'd like to do is come down to the backspace on-click listener. So for me, it's all the way at the bottom. And within here, let's start adding in some code to actually delete characters based on the cursor position. So what are we going to need to do this? Well, we're going to need two integer values. The first one's going to need to store the current position of our cursor. So we're going to call this cursor position. Set that equal to a display.getSelectionStart, and that'll grab the cursor position within our string. What we need to do is create one more int variable. So int, and I'm going to call this text length, and then set that equal to a display.getText, and then we're going to go .length. And then once we have our cursor position and the text length, what we want to do is use an if statement to determine whether or not we actually have characters that we can delete. So we want to make sure that the cursor position isn't equal to 0 and the text length also isn't equal to 0. So why are we doing this? Well, if you think about it, if we're going to be removing characters, we need to make sure that the cursor position isn't at the very end of our string. So what do I mean by that? Let's go back to the example. If we just had my name, Jason, and we have my cursor right here, I'm moving it left and right. If the cursor was at 0, so it'd be just past J, it'd be right in this spot here. If we tried deleting a character, there'd be nothing to delete, and we'd end up getting an error crashing our app. So we want to make sure it's not in this spot, and we want to make sure that we actually have characters to delete. So if the user clicks the delete button when there's nothing in our display, we don't want our app to crash because of that as well. So we're going to make sure that our cursor position isn't 0 and the text length also isn't 0. And then within here, what we're going to need to do is write some logic that can actually delete one character at a time based on whatever string is in our display. So to do this, what we need to do is create a spannable string builder. So we're going to type in spannable string builder. What this is going to allow us to do is manipulate our strings. So I'm just going to call this selection. Set that equal to a display.getText, and then we're going to cast a spannable string builder to our display.getText. So I'm just going to copy this and cast that to our display.getText, and we shouldn't have any errors associated with this variable. And now with the string builder class, what we could do is take out parts of our string. So to do this, let's type in selection.replace whatever cursor position we're at, -1, followed by the cursor position, and then we're going to replace that character with an empty string. And then all we have to do is update our display with the new text. So display.setText with whatever the new selection is. And then don't forget we have to update our cursor, so we need to move that back 1. So display.setSelection, and then we're going to set the new position to cursor position -1 to shift it back 1. So this should be everything we need for our backspace button. So let's go ahead, come up to the top toolbar, click the play button to run our app again, and let's see if our backspace button and the clear button work this time. So let's start typing in some numbers. Let's go 86 times 9. Let's say we wanted to make it 86 times 4, so we can click the backspace button, the 9 disappears, and we can place in a 4. And we should also be able to remove characters within this string. So we could remove this 6. And if we don't want this anymore, we should be able to click the clear button and the string disappears. So the very last button we need to set up in this video is the equals button. The equals button is going to be a little bit different than setting up all the other buttons because we're going to need to install a new library in our Android Studio project. The library we're going to need is called MXParser. Check the description for the link to this download page. All you have to do once you come to this page, it should be MXParser-downloads. scroll all the way down, and what you want to do is click this big button right here, not the small one, the really big one, and it should install a zip file for you. What you want to do is extract that zip file into any folder, wherever you want to store all this stuff. Once you extract that file, you should be presented with a folder that's named something like this. So we're going to open up this folder. You should have these 4 files here. Come into the bin folder, and then all you have to do is find the JDK you're using. I believe I'm using JDK 8, so I'm going to double click this, copy this file right here, and then we're going to come back over to Android Studio. And once we're here, what we need to do is come over to the far left panel and change this option here from Android to Project. And then we're going to expand this topmost folder, come down to the app folder, expand this, and then we're looking for the libs or library folder. What we want to do is paste in that file that we just created into our libs folder. So I'm going to paste that in, click refactor, and then if we expand the libs folder, we should have this file here. So what you want to do now, once you have that .jar file pasted into your libs folder, you're going to right click on it, come all the way down to add as a library, and then you should have this little create library window pop up. All you have to do is click OK, and the library should be added to your project. Now, to make sure that everything was added correctly, all you have to do is come up to the top of the main activity.java file, expand your imports, and put in this import here. As long as you don't get any errors, you have the library installed, then you should be able to evaluate equations. So I'll just put this in the description so you don't have to type it all out. But once you have this library imported into your project, we can come all the way down to the equals button on Click Listener and start writing some code to evaluate the expressions. So within this onCreate method, we're going to create a new string. We're going to call this string user expression, and then set that equal to the display.getText, and then convert that text to a string. And then we're going to come down here and we're going to start using the MXParser library to evaluate whatever expression is stored in our string. We can do that by typing in expression. We'll call it exp, set that equal to a new expression. And all we have to do is pass in the user's expression. So the string that we extracted from our display, we're passing it into the expression class that comes with our MXParser library. And then we're going to create a new string that's going to store the result that's returned to us. So let's call this one result. Set that equal to a string.value of exp.calculate. So let's explain what's happening in this line. exp.calculate comes with our MXParser library. All this is doing is figuring out the answer to our expression, and that's going to return some value, and all we're doing is converting that value to a string so we can update our display with the result. So now that we have the answer to the expression, all we have to do is type in display.setText to the result. And now we should be able to evaluate our expressions. So let's come back over to the far right, click the play button to run our app, and let's see if we can actually evaluate a few expressions. All right, so let's start off simple. Let's go 1 plus 1, and we should get a value of 2, which we do. But after we click the equals button and get our answer, you'll notice our cursor isn't in the correct spot. So if we start typing in new numbers, they're not placed where we'd expect them to be. So let's close out of this and let's fix that really quick. So come back down to the equals button on Click Listener, and we can change that by typing in display.setSelection to whatever the result.length is. So this is just going to put it all the way at the end of our string. So let's go ahead, run the app again, and let's see if that actually shifted our cursor's position. All right, so let's try something a little bit different. Let's go like 5 minus 6. So if we hit equals, we get a -1 and our cursor's placed all the way at the end of our string. Now, there is one more thing we're going to have to do. If you happen to use these special characters for the multiplication and division symbol, MXParser doesn't know what those symbols mean. It's expecting the traditional symbols, so like the / for divide, and not this special character here. So if we type in something like 9 times 9, we're going to get nan because it doesn't know what that special character is. So what we need to do is filter those out and replace them with the correct character. So we can do this right after we extract our user's expression, and all we have to do is type in user expression, and we're going to set that equal to a user expression dot replace all, and we're looking for the division symbol we used in our strings resource file. So type in divide text, and that should give us this symbol right here. So our divide symbol. So we're going to replace all of these symbols with a /. And then we need to do the same thing for our multiplication symbol. So user expression is going to equal the user expression dot replace all, And then again, we're just going to use our get resources.getString, and we're looking for the multiply text. So this symbol right here, and we're going to replace this symbol with an asterisk. So now if we run our app again, we should be able to use our multiplication and division buttons. So let's try the 9 times 9 again, and we should get 81, which we do, and we could divide this by 2. We get 40.5, we can times it by like 3.3, we get 133.65, and we can clear stuff. So if we did something like 5 minus 6, times that by 9, that looks like it's working. So our parentheses seem pretty good. All right, so I think I'm gonna end the video here. We have the bulk of the app completed. Now in the next video, what we're gonna be working on is rotating the screen. So if we rotate it right now, you'll see we get some weird stuff going on, and the other buttons that we want, like the trig functions, don't appear. So we're going to be adding all that in the next video. As always, if you guys have any questions about anything that happened in this video, leave a comment down below. I'd be more than happy to help you guys out. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.